anything that needs any more stuff. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Plato, talking about the Plato stuff, and we saw that because of his arguments in epistemology, he believes that what he needs to have are these forms. And so kind of the driving force behind them is his theory of knowledge. So if we're going to know stuff, we got to have forms. We know stuff, so we got forms. And as we saw, they have, you know, many strange properties. They're real, the realest of the reals. They're obviously objective because it's not just a matter of opinion or people think. They're independent, unchanging, eternal, and they don't exist in space or time. And this part makes them super weird, which leads to that problem we saw, what's called the participation problem. To use a lousy metaphor, imagine if someone claimed there was a website, but it was located in another, inaccessible reality, yet somehow you could view pages there. That would seem kind of strange. How do you connect to something that's beyond all that's here? And of course, Plato thinks not a big deal, and his supporters think it's not such a big deal, but critics say that's pretty bizarre. So what are some other reasons why Plato accepted forms? Well, again, part of it was that paradox of change. The idea is that when things change, something has to stay the same. So if you're different from you used to be, if you're still you, that means some of you didn't change and some did. And he thinks that the forms help solve that. As we saw, our good dead friend Heraclitus said what? The world is, forever changing. It's fire. And Plato said, that's pretty cool. And Parmenides, of course, said, well, he said, I'm not cheese, quote. But also he said that nothing changes. Change is an illusion. And so Plato was able to have both. The world that we live in, the world of particulars, the world of fire, it changes constantly. The world of the forms is unchanging. So we end up with this Platonic compromise. Changing world of particulars, unchanging world of the forms. And so the particulars are changing, imperfect, the objects of opinion. And the forms, they're of course unchanging, universal, and they are the eternal. Now given this view, and this is something that becomes part of, or if you see it as problematic, infects like a virus, Western thought up until this day. Now, and we'll see this throughout the course of the course. One view that Plato kind of got going is this idea that reality comes in degrees. Now, kind of intuitively, we tend to think that things are either real or unreal. It either is or isn't. But Plato has this notion of degrees of reality. Now, one way to think about that, because again, normally we think of something exists, the tables and chairs, and there are things that are not real that don't exist, like unicorns and dragons, etc. But Plato has this notion that there are degrees of realness. At the lowest level would be, well, actually wouldn't be real at all, would be nothing. And then at the highest level would be the forms. They are the most real. And then in between would be degrees of reality. So this would be, say, perfect beauty. This would be like nothing. And then in between would be levels of beauty. So like a average person would be like, an average. And then someone who's like a supermodel would be higher up. And then something like a humanly beautiful would be like further up here. But nothing would be perfectly beautiful except for the form. Now, one way to think of this would be obviously degrees of things. And I'll use an example from video games. In video games, you can have characters with certain attributes. You can have the score of beauty, see how beautiful your character is. And of course, the closer you are to, say, the highest score possible, the greater degree of beauty your character would have.
imagine beauty as intelligence.
Yeah, or you could use intelligence. This would be perfect intelligence. You know, the smartest, that perfect intelligence, whatever that would mean. And then be varying degrees. Like you could use like a intelligence score or IQ score in there. And you can do that for every attribute. So there are degrees of reality. There's not just real or not real, there's like more real. Now as we'll see, this had a line.
Move on. I'm still trying to, when you see, I can see the IQ and the beauty and everything, but when you say real or not real, or degrees of realness, I mean, you either exist or you don't exist. I mean, the forms of the spiritual world, they exist, but they just, they exist in according to him and others. They exist in a different dimension, but they still exist. So, what's the, how, explain that degree of realness better, I mean.
Yeah, let's see. Well, one way to use, I could use this would be kind of a bad analogy. Think about, for example, like the movie fictional view of ghosts, that they're insubstantial. You know, they're shadowy, fleshy. So in a way, a ghost is less real in a sense than a person because they're not as substantial. You can like put your hand through them. And solid, you know, being a solid person would be you're more real in a way. You have higher capabilities. So one way to think of it is, to use the metaphor, is think of like a faded image versus like a precise, unfaded image. I mean, true, like they both exist, but one is sort of like more vivid than the other. Another example is in C.S. Lewis. He writes about like, one of the things is about heaven and hell, and how heaven is like super real in a way, such that, you know, creatures from hell, or people condemned to hell, can't even affect it, because in comparison, they're so less real, they have less capability. So you think of it as, again, visually, you think of like a faded image versus like a very vivid one. Now, if you don't like the idea of like real versus less real, you can think of it in terms of being better and worse, might be a better way to put it. Like with the IQ, like being like, you know, super genius versus like, you know, average versus, you know, unintelligent, like a rock. Now this is, as we'll see, this is all kinds of implications that we'll see with Thomas Aquinas, etc. It's later used to argue for God's existence. It's used in ethics, as we'll see with Thomas Aquinas. The idea being that if you're higher up on the hierarchy of reality, then lesser beings are inferior, morally. And it's also used, interestingly enough, to justify eating animals, because the argument from Aquinas and Augustine is, roughly put, we're metaphysically superior to them, so we can eat animals. Animals are metaphysically superior to plants, so they can eat plants. Now, of course, it would follow that angels are superior to us, they can eat us. So, some implications there. Now, it also, of course, has a kind of, you know, grim side to it, because, as you might imagine, this is used to justify oppression. By talking about people being lesser, metaphysically lesser, and being superior, and pretty much most of the terrible stuff people do comes down to we're better than them, so we can do terrible stuff to them because it's not really terrible, it's they're less.
So it can apply to cannibalism?
It could. I mean, one implication would be is if you were more of greater, you know, quality than someone else, you could devour them.
So would that apply to like the entire theme of Handmaid's Tale, where they have the hands, even though technically they would have the upper hand, no pun intended, because they can still bear children? Would that apply there? Like they're being put in that subservient position because of their lesserness on the metaphysical scale?
Yeah, because that's the, I mean, yeah, because anytime people want to oppress other people, and they put some thought into it, which they often do, is they'll typically have a hierarchy. You know, they'll say, and they'll often explicitly bring in, you know, metaphysics to justify, to say, you know, these people are, you know, inferior in a fundamental way. So it does have, of course, kind of a grim side. to it as well. So these particulars resemble the forms and participate in the forms in varying degrees. And again, that's all super mysterious. If you're like, what does this participate or resemble? What does that mean? And you're like, I'm not sure. Exactly. That's one of the problems, is it's a mystery. So we know, for example, how, well, you can have, everyone can load a copy of a website on their phone, and you can all be seeing the website. So you have the original website, and then you have all the instance of it, so it resembles. Or you can make photocopies of things. That makes sense. And so in a way, you can think of the particulars as like a photocopy of a form, or they're like loading the website of the form on your phone. But of course, the metaphor completely blows up because the forms aren't here, and they can't interact causally. But his claim is that these forms, in addition to being objects of knowledge, they make things what they are. So if you say, why is somebody beautiful? The answer would be because they participate or resemble the form more than someone less beautiful. So if you have a supermodel versus like an average person, the answer would be they participate in the form more than the average person. Similarly with like justice, etc. Also, they group individuals into categories. So why are all humans human? The form of human. Why are all beautiful things beautiful? The form of beautiful. And this leads obviously to debates about what are the metaphysical kinds? What categories do we have? Now, one of Plato's, well, he has two like important drawings. One is the famous line, the other is the allegory of the cave. Now, here's how he leads up to both of these. Now, going back to our previous good dead friends, the pre-Socratics, we see the notion of the one and the many. Now, Plato notes this. Suppose we take beauty. Is beauty the same as ugliness? No. So they're different. So since each is one, they are two. Now, Plato notes that we can combine in the particulars varying degrees of beauty and ugliness. So that becomes the many. So we have beauty, ugly, and each of them is one, so they're two, and then the many things that are beautiful and ugly mixed together. I mean, to use a metaphor, you could have like blue and yellow. They're two separate colors. You mix them together, you get green, but you can mix in varying degrees. So you can have many, many greens. You can also have many blues, so unless you kind of falls apart there. Now, Plato divides people into two broad categories: the lovers of sights and sounds, and the lovers of wisdom, philosophers and non-philosophers. Now again, it doesn't mean necessarily like professional philosophers. You don't have to have like a PhD in philosophy to be one of these philosophers. So he's dividing people up not based on academic credentials, but their approach to life. And he's critical, as you might imagine, of people who are lovers of sounds and sights as opposed to lovers of wisdom. As he sees it, they are effectively asleep. Now, the movie The Matrix, which is now weirdly a classic movie, came out 19 years ago, and it partakes heavily of the Platonic metaphor, because the people in the Matrix, they are trapped in sights and sounds. They are effectively, even when they're awake, in the Matrix, they're effectively physically asleep. They're dreamers. Those who are awake, according to Plato, they are aware of not just the beauty particulars here, they're aware of absolute beauty, the form of beauty. And so they're aware of the distinction between true beauty and the beautiful objects. So in Plato's world, there's forms existing in their form place, and then there's this world of particulars, the inferior world. Now, in terms of going back to knowledge and opinion, Plato, again, will kind of go through this kind of quickly because we're focused mainly on the metaphysics rather than the epistemology. Again, as we saw before, what he wants to do is show that knowledge is not opinion. And he argues it, extensively. Now, if you know, do you know something? And if you don't know, what do you know? Yeah, nothing. So you can know something, you can't know nothing. And Plato reasons from that, perhaps because of the language, that absolute beauty can be known absolutely. The utterly non-existent is utterly unknown, because it's nothing. And then anything between absolute being and nothing will be between knowledge and ignorance, namely the realm of opinion. So as he sees it, this world, because of his argument, this world is the world of opinion, the realm of the forms is the realm of knowledge, and of course, the nothing is the realm of ignorance, no knowledge. Now he also advances a spheres and faculties argument, basically reasoning like this. The way we tell if something is the same faculty is if it has the same sphere of things that are perceived. So for example, colors all fall under sight, sounds under hearing. So we divide up our senses by what they detect. Because we see, light, and we hear vibrations of objects, and we taste shapes. And so we divide the senses up by what they detect. We don't hear shapes, we don't taste colors. Although there is a condition in which people seem to do that colors taste a certain way or something, or they hear. Anyways, we'll steer away from that. So his view is that since knowledge and opinion are separate areas about separate things, the faculties must be different. So knowledge is not opinion, opinion is not knowledge. Again, Plato wants to try to show that knowledge is not just having an opinion that's true. It's got to have those forms. Now, he goes through and eliminates the various options. Namely, again, the object of opinion can't be nothing. Because if you get an opinion, you get an opinion about something, not nothing. You can have a show about nothing, Seinfeld supposedly, but you can't have an opinion about nothing. So not being is not one thing but nothing, so we don't have opinions about nothing, we have about something. So opinion then is the intermediate between being and not being. And so the objects of opinion for him are that middle ground, the blended realm of the case of beauty and ugly blended together. Now, to sort of support this, Plato points out something that seems true. If you look at the world, even if you take the most glamorous supermodel, is their beauty perfect? No, because otherwise we would need Photoshop to Photoshop them up. Yeah, so you can take the most beautiful person, if you look closely enough, you'll see imperfections. There'll always be some defect. And so the many are this, blend of beauty and ugliness, and so on for all qualities. Everything is a blend of, perfect and non-perfect. So as he sees it, all the stuff here are things we have opinions about, but not knowledge. And so those who love opinion don't have knowledge, and they see the many things. They see the things here, but deny and are unaware of the absolute beauty. So the objects of knowledge, which are for Plato again the forms, they are absolute. They're known, but you don't see them. Whereas the many, you see them, but he claims you don't know them, because the objects of knowledge have to be those forms, or so he claims. Now again, many other people disagree with Plato. Just because he's Plato dead doesn't mean he's right. Now, Plato was a key part of his metaphysical view and his epistemology he brings in the sun, what is analogous to the good. And he believes that the soul is like the eye, that it's, there is in the visible world, we see because of, well, before they had, well, actually they had fire then, but not like electrical lighting. But the way we see stuff is in virtue of what? How are we seeing stuff in the room now? Yeah, what's enabling us to see?
The sun.
Yeah, the sun illuminates the world, enabling us to see with our senses. Now, Plato, metaphorically, says that the good is like the sun. Namely that it, just as the sun is the, author of generation of the world, because the ancients were aware you need sun for to survive and for plants. And he says, by analogy, in the Platonic realm, the good has that role. Now we see here many important things, but one important thing, of course, is the idea of there being an objective good. There is the good. It's not a matter of opinion, it's not subjective, it's not relative. There is the metaphysical good. Now also we see here the idea that there is something above all of the things. In this case, the good, that is responsible for everything, illuminates everything. And later thinkers, when you see the rise of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they of course assign who to the role of the good? Yeah, who casts a light, illuminates. Same language. Creator creates things, is the light that illuminates all things. Now, people who don't believe in God would say that Christianity, Islam, etc., are basically stealing from Plato. You just stick God in place of the good. Christian thinkers during the Middle Ages, many of them argued that Plato and Aristotle, to use their phrase, were Christians before Christ. That they were aware of this, they were filthy pagans, well, probably clean pagans, but they were mistaken. They didn't see fully the truth, but to the degree they saw the truth, they were seeing God. That's the claim. And so there is a complicated relation between Plato and Christianity. Again, critics of Christianity say Christianity is basically Platonism for the masses. People who can't, don't want to do the philosophy. And of course, people who believe would say that to the degree Plato got it right, he was talking about God. Just very similar rules. Now, Plato, I'll go to the picture. He puts forth the line. And here's the line. Now, unlike the grading scale, D is the best, A is the worst. So it's a reversal. Now, as Plato sees it, here's how reality breaks down. And also, in his view, the metaphysics and epistemology are smushed together. You can tear them apart, but they're linked. Now, at the lowest level, this is the realm what he calls the A level. And the faculty of the soul that deals with this for him is the imagination. And this is the realm of images. Now this would include shadows of things. It also for him includes all art. Now he's not claiming that like a painting or statue would be like a shadow, but his view is it's a mirror image. It's not the thing. So for example, let's take an obvious example. Suppose you're hungry and you have like a picture of a pizza. Well, that satisfies your hunger. No, because it's but an image of a pizza. Yeah, it's not even a real pizza. Now, because of this, Plato believes that art is the least of things, because it is mere imitation, as we'll see, of an imitation. So if you ever take the aesthetics class, offered in the spring, hopefully, well, it depends if we get someone to teach it, because I'm the last philosopher, which is a much boring movie than like the series in like The Last Airbender.
Why did they all leave?
Money, because they said to Dr. Scriven, "You want to be a dean? Here's a huge stack of dean cash." No, it's a great career opportunity. Maybe to move from being just a professor to the dean of the school. It's like going to the, kind of analogous like going to the major leagues.
Mm.
So career advancement, excellent reason to do so. And people don't trust me to be in charge of stuff, which is probably for the best. Yeah, so this is the realm, well, Plato argues that one of his moral arguments against art is essentially it's an imitation of things. It's not the objects of knowledge. Also, Plato advances in Book 10 of the Republic the paradigm argument for censorship, which is basically that art has a corrupting effect on the soul, therefore it needs to be censored. So his two main counts are, one, from the standpoint of epistemology and metaphysics, art is the least of things. It's the lowest. It does exist, but it's the least thing. So not the object of knowledge. And he also believes it's has a terrible corrupting influence. Now the next step up, level B, is the realm of physical phenomena. All this stuff. So here's all this stuff would be the example. And this is the realm of belief, the objects of opinion. Now this stuff, we normally would say this stuff is real. We'd say like real pizza versus the Drago pizza. But for Plato, this stuff is also unreal. I mean, it exists, but it's not the truly real world. I mean, it's real, but it's not real, the realist. And this is the realm of, empirical science. And Plato, doesn't consider this like a realm of like evil, it's a realm of imperfection. Now, of course, we do later see this in religion. We have the imperfect world of sin, the veil of tears, that everything here is sort of inferior and corrupt. And again, that's why some people argue that Christianity, Islam, Judaism, strongly influenced by Plato, and others who believe say, well, Plato was just getting a glimpse of the truth, but he was a clean pagan, and so he didn't quite get it right. Now, the next level up, level C, is the realm of the mathematicals and the lower forms, although Plato kind of changes this around a bit. Now, this level, it has two main hallmarks. One is we reason about this through our intelligence through symbols. So Plato believes that one hallmark of this level is we use symbols to do our reasoning. Examples would be mathematics, logic, geometry. So we draw circles and formulas. And Plato says these symbols and formulas aren't the things, they stand in for like when you draw a circle, we know it's not a perfect circle, but it's standing in symbolically for the perfect circle. And we do the math, it's standing in for the real math. Now the second hallmark of this is at that level, we do things in steps. So for example, a logical proof, you do the steps, or geometric proof, or doing mathematics, you do stuff through steps. And you could be, if you do all your steps right, and your evidence, your steps are, the content is true, you'll end up with truth. And later thinkers like, Descartes and others, they embrace this as well. So this is where things like mathematics, deduction, geometry, for Plato, that's where it would live. And corresponding to, geometry, mathematics, and logic would be what you could kind of call the lesser forms, all the mathematicals and stuff. Now, the highest level is the realm of the forms themselves. And Plato believes the way you reach this level is not by using symbols. I mean, you can say words and stuff, but you don't use symbols to do this. And you don't use steps of reasoning. So what do you use? Well, Plato believes that you use what he calls, or what is translated roughly as, rational intuition. Later translated as, the natural light, not the beer. Although there's a lot of jokes about that. And the idea being is that we have like an inner capacity. One view is kind of like passive, that the light of the good shines on things, and you see the highest, the forms revealed to you. Other later thinkers, in a way, make it kind of like we have, like light, we have a light of reason that shines like a spotlight on things and illuminates them for us. But the idea being is that however this light works, whether it's like shining from the good or God or from us, that what it reveals is always true, utterly true. Now, this becomes embedded in Western thought, and actually it's kind of universal in a way. And it becomes so much so embedded that it becomes part of our language, and even part of our, the way we draw cartoons. So, if someone achieves an advanced state of wisdom, we say they are what? They are, wise, but we say they're enlightened. If you're drawing a cartoon, you want to show a character gets an idea, you show, a light bulb. They're enlightened, they're illuminated. And so this idea of the light of natural reason, the light of God, or light of the good, has become part of our vocabulary, and part of our cartoonology, to make up a word. And so hugely influential. Now, from the time of Plato until today, people still use that notion, the idea that you just see the truth. Now, one of the obvious problems is, and our good dead friend John Locke raised this problem, how do you know when you're seeing something illuminated by the light of natural reason, or whether you're just crazy? Or, since Locke was a Christian, whether the devil is revealing stuff to you. And Locke, being a Christian, he was worried that the devil would, shine a, devil light on things, so people would think that they were absolutely right. And in a way, it's Plato's to blame, in part because he had this idea where you just see the truth. Now, at this stage, you got to go through steps. You got to show your work. So some could say, well, yeah, that step is crazy. That doesn't work. But the level where you're just seeing the truth, how do you prove that someone's not illuminated? How do you prove they're not seeing the truth? And from one's own standpoint, again, the problem is, how do you know when you've been illuminated by the good or God or natural reason? And how do you know when you're just barking mad? And you're just seeing all, it seems utterly convincing. I mean, think of people who are like dangerously psychotically insane, fanatics. To them, I'm sure they see it as perfectly true. Their mind is full of what they see as light, but they are totally mad, dangerously mad. Yeah, so thanks, Plato. Yeah, so one thing.
Plato said, if it's true, what's going to come out of it is truth.
Yeah.
If it's not, then truth won't come out of it. So to me, that's how you know that it's true.
Yeah, eventually you'd run up against,
Because when
reality.
you're talking to people, if they're crazy, you know they're crazy because they'll be saying something.
Unless it's you. How do you know when you're,
Then you won't know.
Yeah, that'll seem perfectly, that make perfect sense. Yeah, this has been a problem, a problem in epistemology ever since. How do you know when something is just feels true or seems true? Which is why typically, even though Plato puts this in place, generally, there's sort of a discomfort with that because you can't prove it. It's not like in a movie where like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something where it gleams with clearly like a holy light. You're like, yeah, there's no mistaking it. It's just people just they just feel really strongly about it. Which is why, not surprisingly, philosophers, even though they probably created this, very suspicious of it because you really can't prove or disprove it, and so there's a preference for this level because at least you can check to see is the reasoning good. But then, of course, the problem is that you can't. We'll see if you take the epistemology class, you can't prove things forever. If you had to prove everything, you'd be off in infinite regress. So you have to accept something as true, and that's where this rational intuition comes in. Then the question arises: how do you know you can trust that? And the answer is, the skeptic would say, you can't. So do. Now, one of Plato's most famous metaphors is the allegory of the cave. Have you seen the movie The Matrix, which is classic? You've seen the allegory of the cave, you've also seen Descartes' meditation, because the creators of the film basically decided, hey, let's do Philosophy 101, and put it in a movie with Keanu Reeves and some explosions, and Lawrence Fishburne, and let's blow some stuff up. Which is, let's blow some stuff up is a great philosophical concept. So what's going on in this allegory of the cave? Well, Plato asks us to imagine the following sort of scenario. And you can kind of use the allegory of this room. Works out pretty well. So imagine this is the cave. And what you have is you're trapped in your desk, gazing at the screen. And of course back then they didn't have LCD projectors, so Plato had a fire in the back of the room with the fire projecting it, and people walking in front of the fire holding things on sticks to project it onto the wall. But since we get a projector, we can use this. So it's being projected on this screen, and in Plato's allegory of the cave, you'd be seeing what you thought was the real world. And Plato asks us to imagine that you look away from the screen, you look around the room, and somehow slip out of your chair, and you realize, in the case of Plato, that there's a fire back there, or in this case, you realize it's just a projector putting things on the wall, and then you escape from the cave or the classroom, and you get out into the world. And of course, the cave is dark, so at first, you can't see things directly, but eventually you adjust to the light of day, and you're able to see the real world. And of course, in the Matrix, that's how they kind of play it out. People are trapped in the Matrix. Neo gets busted out, and he's brought up into the Nebuchadnezzar, the hover vehicle, or big hover vehicle, and he asks Morpheus, why do my eyes hurt? And the answer is, of course, you've never used this. And so it's copied from Plato's allegory of the cave. The person is in the light of reality for the first time, and they can't bear the light. So what's going on there? Well, basically here's how it works, and it corresponds, not surprisingly, to the law. So it's both the epistemology, what do you know, and the metaphysics, what there is. So here, the lowest level is back to level A. The people are trapped in chains. They merely have their imagination, their illusions on the wall. They have the shadows and echoes of reality. It's kind of like, it's a perfect metaphor for education. All the lies that we are taught as truths throughout our lives. And then, again, someone slips away and they're loose in the cave. Now this level, that's at the level B. There's sense perception. You can see the fire, which is an allegory, a metaphor for the sun. And this is a level of belief. So when someone slipped free of the illusions, but they're still in the physical world, like doing science, for Plato, they would be at this level. They're better than people who are trapped, but they're still trapped in the cave. Then when someone busts out of the cave, they're at that level C, where they're semi-free, because they're outside of the cave, but they can't bear the sight of the sun, because they've been in the cave for so long. And they have to look at reflections and moonlight. And that's a level of doing, mathematics and so forth. Then the final level is a person is able to fully, not like stare directly into the sun, our president has done, but able to stand the light of day. And that person is fully liberated. And so there's the corresponding metaphysics, the realm of the forms, the realm of the mathematical is the lesser forms, the physical world, images and illusions. And of course the epistemic levels, realm of knowledge, the realm of belief, the realm of just illusion. Now Plato, of course, he foreshadows in the Republic what happens to Socrates. He raised the question, what would happen if someone got out of the cave and then came back in? Because in the movie The Matrix, it's explicitly in the plot. Because people like Morpheus, etc., and Trinity are free from the Matrix, but they go back and get back into it. And of course, to the standpoint of the people who are still trapped, someone talking about, this other world, this is all like a matrix, this is all the matrix, it seems insane. And so a person coming back from, full light of day would seem foolish to people in the cave. And again, Plato foreshadows, because he knows it's going to happen, that if someone came back into the cave, as say Socrates, and tried to help people, they would, far from being grateful, they would try to kill that person for trying to set them free. And also foreshadowing once again, he notes that a person who's seen true justice would do poorly in the legal system of the world, because they would be dealing with true justice as opposed to what we have here. Now, Plato also notes the idea that, he brings up a moral point here, that interestingly enough, the capacity for intelligence in the soul is both good and potentially bad, because that capacity allows people to see, the forms, etc. But as he notes, that a clever rogue, as he says, can clearly see, the way to their ends. But the problem is that they don't see like the full picture. And from Plato's standpoint, what he calls this is the unity of the virtues. The idea being that if you don't have all the virtues, you don't partake of the good, then a person becomes exceptionally dangerous. So just like movie villains, or movie villains that are the most dangerous are the ones that have many positive, powerful qualities, but are misguided or bad. I mean, to use a current one from a popular movie, Thanos would be a perfect example of this, because he has many great positive qualities, but he clearly sees his way to his goal, which is killing half the universe, which is I guess it's worthwhile. You gotta have goals, but of course he doesn't see his keen sight is serving what we consider evil. As people point to the obvious, why not just double the resource? Why kill half the people? Why not just double the resources? And of course, kind of the prediction some people are making is that the way the next, it's in a way a spoiler, I guess, but just guess, is the way that the movie will fold out is that in the next one, Thanos will go from being the clever rogue to being enlightened. He'll see the error of his ways. Or maybe Captain Marvel will just beat the pudding out of him, take the gauntlet. I guess it depends what kind of mood Hollywood is in, reflective and philosophical, or just looking for some ass whooping, I guess. Or maybe both. You could have Captain Marvel philosophizing while she beats the pudding out of Thanos. I assume he's full of pudding. He's like the grimace, or whatever they fill grimaces with. I'm guessing pudding. Now, Plato, of course, has got his cave, and he also has a creation story of the world. Now, in cosmology, it's considered part of astrophysics guys. They've stolen it. But at one point, it was part of philosophy. It actually still is. We shall take it back someday. That's fair warning. Now, it's basically the study of the cosmos, the study of all that there is here. And Plato got this going. Now, this, of course, is still a study today. The explanation of the cosmos, the beginnings of the world, the nature of this reality. And Plato, of course, has got a story. Now, today, of course, we have the same sort of division. There are people, again, by bumper stickers. There are those who say everything happens for a reason. And there's a bumper sticker that says stuff happens. And of course, there's stuff in between, like total random universe, purposeful guided universe, and then degrees. You have some people, some believe, you get some order and guidance, but then there's some randomness. Now, Plato believed that the universe does have a foundation in rational order. It's a rational universe. And in his dialogue, the Philetus, he believes that, basically it's an early argument from design. The classic argument from design is, if you look at the world, in the case, Plato looks at celestial objects, stars, planets, moons, etc. His argument was it seems to work incredibly well. Therefore, there must be an intelligence guiding it. Therefore, there is a design. There's something in charge of the universe. And this later gets developed, obviously, in religions. That this entity that orders the universe is, God. Now, in the Timaeus, Plato gives an account of how the world came to be. And again, another critical part of cosmology is how the world come to be. Where did it come from, if it came from anywhere, and how did this happen? Now, Plato lays out what he calls a likely story. And he's well aware that it's trying to say like how this all occurred, it's very difficult. And Plato's operating with no telescopes, no equipment. He's just sitting there thinking and drinking and just trying to come up with a story of how it all originated. But you gotta start somewhere. So what's his story? Now, he lays out a principle that is still largely embraced by most thinkers today, which is this. Everything that becomes or is created must of necessity be created by some cause, which is known by later thinkers as no ex nihilo creation. In other words, you can't get something from nothing. Now, he also reasoned, given the size and complexity of the world, you've got to have a cause equal to the task. It's got to be powerful enough to make it happen and intelligent enough to do all this stuff. Essentially, he's making an empirical argument. You look at the world, what would be capable of making it so? To use the obvious analogy, if you came across like a machine, like in a desert, and it was incredibly complicated and powerful, you would think that whoever created this must have been brilliant. Now, Plato takes this entity to be God, sometimes translated, or the demiurge. Now, Plato, one unfortunate thing about some of the translations is they just put God in there. But Plato didn't seem to believe in God like in the Christian, Jewish, Islamic sense. So his demiurge is basically a constructor. So how does this demiurge differ from, say, the God of religion? Well, first thing is this. The demiurge for Plato is not omnipotent, not all powerful. So one major difference. Secondly, the demiurge doesn't create the world. Now, in standard, Christianity, Islam, etc., in the beginning there was God and nothing else, and God says, 6 days of creation, and so he creates everything. Plato, though, takes the view that whatever was here has always been here. It's uncreated. What the demiurge does is basically shapes it. To use a metaphor, I'll use a 3D printer metaphor. The demiurge is like the printer, and it's pulling in, if you're using a 3D printer, you put in spools of plastic and it prints out something. And so the demiurge is basically, crudely put, pulling in the pre-existing matter, and then it has within its, mind, it has all the forms. And so what it does is, just like if you're a printer and you have a file in there for printing, like a cup or a dragon or something, that it prints it out in the crude plastic. And of course, if you've seen 3D printing, it's still kind of crude. And so the idea is the demiurge, is pulling in all that matter and then producing stuff. Like it has a plan of like Earth. It produces like Earth and the sun. And so everything is made of this imperfect matter, but it's shaped and informed by the demiurge. So it's kind of a constructing machine. So next time, we'll turn to more demiurging and see how the universe was printed.